The wide open spaces of Aintree were to echo to the sounds of high-pitched racing engines again, as for the first time, the Liverpool track was to host the British Grand Prix. Stirling Moss had now joined Fangio in the Mercedes team, and they arrived with their high-speed transporter and 5 cars, one each for the Maestro and the Young Pretender, and a third for faithful veteran Carl Kling, a fourth for Italian veteran Piero Taruffi, plus a spare. The team had abandoned the fully enclosed bodywork in favour of the open-wheeled style, and Fangio had already notched up victories in the Argentine, Belgian and Dutch Grand Prix, once again putting the double world champion well in the lead of the World Championship for 1955. Although the stands were empty for practice, 150,000 people were expected for race day. All-enveloping bodywork, now abandoned by Mercedes, was being tried by Connaught on their prototype B-Series car for Ken McAlpine. Ferrari had brought along 3 of its aging 4-cylinder 625 models for Hawthorn, Trantignan and Eugenio Castellotti, and Gordini had 3 cars entered. But it was Uhlenhaut's brilliantly engineered W196 Mercedes that everyone had come to see, and Moss set pole with Fangio just 0.2 of a second slower. The engines on these cars are 2.5-litre straight 6s with fuel injection and desdemonic valves. Out on the circuit, Hawthorn in the outclassed Ferrari is some 5 seconds a lap slower than Moss, and Mike Sparken's little Gordini over 12 seconds slower. Moss was at his best in the summer heat in car number 12, but could he win his own Grand Prix? The best of the rest was Berra in the 250F Maserati. His 2 minutes 1.4 seconds was good enough for a front row start in among the Mercedes, and a bare-armed Fangio was just a joy to watch at Welling Crossing, showing his protege Moss the way around Aintree. And lap after lap, Moss proved the reliability as well as the speed of the Mercedes. Eugenio Castellotti proved to be the quickest of the Ferrari drivers, with a time of 2 minutes 5 seconds dead, 0.4 quicker than Hawthorn. The young Castellotti from Milan was competing in his first British Grand Prix. Kling demonstrated the clean, if somewhat heavy and Teutonic lines of the open-wheel bodywork now used by Mercedes, the unsatisfactory streamliner having been abandoned. Mercedes engineer Rudolf Uhlenhaut was listed as a reserve driver, but he did plenty of practice laps. We spotted Kling at one of Aintree's slowest corners, the infield section cottage corner. Luigi Musso appeared for Maserati. Maserati have cleaned up the lines of the 250F by deleting a lot of the louvres. Kling came round again, approaching from Anchor Crossing, before taking the left at Cottage. Jack Fairman practiced in one of the experimental B-Series Connaughts, but he was destined to be a non-starter. Luigi Musso is the son of an Italian diplomat, and he is also an expert shot, fencer and horseman. Uhlenhaut, as well as being head of Mercedes' experimental department, was no slouch when it came to driving. Castellotti was Ferrari's fastest driver, making the 4th row of the grid. The grandstands were packed next day, and the sports car race looked like being an Aston Martin field day. The front row comprised the 3 DB3Ss of Peter Collins, Peter Walker, with Roy Salvadori on pole. Peter Collins was enjoying the Liverpool sunshine, more so because rain had been expected. Mike Hawthorne was to drive Jaguar D-Type number 9. Behind the front runners stood an assorted selection of Lotus, Cooper, Connaught and the other sports cars. Walker made a dreadful start from the middle of the front row, and Hawthorne rushed up the inside. And as they completed the first lap and turned into Tats Corner, Hawthorne led a gaggle of Astons. Next time around, Salvadori led, the Aston DB3S obviously suited to this tight circuit. Hawthorne was now down to third, behind Salvadori and Collins, with Peter Walker shaping up to overtake him. David Brown of Aston Martin wandered across the infield, ready to welcome home his team as they crossed the line in first, second and third and fourth position. Hawthorne in the Seoul Works Jaguar ended fifth, with the private Ds of Bob Berry and Ninian Sanderson behind him. Winner Salvadori and second place Collins discussed their success with Le Patron, Huddersfield gear maker David Brown. Peter Walker joined the party. And then it came time for the Grand Prix itself. Vanwall had 2 of their Cooper chassis cars for Ken Wharton and the American Harry Schell. As usual, there was an impenetrable throng around the Mercedes team. Maserati had 3 250Fs with new big port engines for Berra, Mieres and Musso. The fastest of the 3 was Jean Berra, who'd been the only driver in practice able to split the Mercedes. He would now start from the outside of the front row. Gordini's, now very much off the pace in Grand Prix racing, also had 3 cars entered. Vanwall team manager David York was in conversation with Ken Wharton. With Fairman non-starting, Connaught's fortunes would be upheld by the Works Streamliner in the hands of McAlpine. Australian dirt track racer Jack Brabham had built this Cooper himself at the Cooper Works. It's basically a central-seater sports car with a 2.2-litre Bristol engine, and it qualified as the first rear-engine car in Grand Prix racing since Auto Union before the war. British-run Maseratis were lined up for Peter Collins and Lance Macklin. At last, the crowd began to clear around the silver arrows. Neubauer, even in the heat, stuck to his suit and Trilby. Number 12 was the Moss machine. And the Silver Fox, Piero Taruffi, had Italian words for Neubauer. The 3 Ferraris were for Castellotti, Hawthorne, and Frenchman Maurice Trintignant. As the start drew near, no one of the 150,000 people in the crowd could envisage anything but a Mercedes victory. Moss was ready for action. Could he be the first Briton to win his home Grand Prix? Behra's shirt matched his Maserati's colour. Fangio's Mercedes number 10 was in the middle of the front row, and a nice touch this, Moss's car displayed the Union Jack. Harry Schell had put the fastest of the Vanwalls in the middle of the third row, alongside Mieres' Maserati. Behind them came number 20, Castellotti's Ferrari, and the Musso Maserati. On row 5, Trintignant, Hawthorne, and Manzon. Row 7 contained Ramos's Gordini, McAlpine's Connaught, and Macklin with the Sterling Moss-owned Maserati. World champion Fangio is always one of the last drivers onto the grid. Moss took last-minute instructions from Neubauer, who seemed to want to start the race as well. At last they were off. Fangio led Moss by inches through Tat's corner. Further down the field, one driver was already in trouble as McAlpine flashed past the ailing Maserati in his Connaught. By lap 3, Moss had nipped past Fangio into the lead. Roberto Mieres had his Maserati in 5th place, ahead of Taruffi's Mercedes. After just 5 laps, Behra was lapping Brabham's painfully slow Cooper Bristol. A couple of laps later, Fangio was back in the lead, with Moss glued to his tail, and at Cottage, Mieres lay 4th, just behind Kling's Mercedes. At half distance, Moss led again, and Fangio had been held up by passing back markers. Tony Rolt was headed towards Cottage Corner when the throttle stuck open. He managed to switch off and coast back to Rob Walker's pit. Mieres too would retire with a piston failure. And Taruffi needed to pass Musso to make it a Mercedes 1, 2, 3, 4, and before long he'd done it. Moss continued to keep Fangio behind him. Castellotti was out, so Ferrari hopes now lay with Mike Hawthorne. McAlpine was struggling with failing oil pressure. And Taruffi was now keeping Musso at bay. Rolt's throttle had been repaired and the car taken over by Peter Walker. Moss maintained the advantage, whilst McAlpine was still running, just. But Taruffi was now struggling to stay ahead of Musso. And Lance Macklin had a quick spin in the Moss Maserati. Kling was now the only driver on the same lap as Moss and Fangio. Hawthorne was lying 6th, but felt very ill and happily handed over to Castellotti, whose own Ferrari had gone out. Behra's Maserati was also out at Anchor Crossing with a broken oil pipe. Brabham had abandoned his Cooper just after the pits with engine failure. The Mercedes mechanics had nothing to do, and Neubauer himself was looking forward to his best result so far. The Mercedes pit board reads PI, piano, or take it steady, chaps. Was that a signal for Fangio to stay where he was and let Moss win? Lap 88, 2 laps to go, and the gap was 3 seconds. And just to prove a point, Moss broke his own lap record, and so came home to an historic first victory for a British driver in the British Grand Prix, with Mercedes finishing 1, 2, 3, 4, also a first in Grand Prix racing.